Hi, Rachel.
Hey John, how are you?
Fine. How are you?
Good.
You look like you're all wired for sound.
Yeah. I'm outside on my porch. So,
It's a nice day then.
yeah, it's beautiful. I don't know, it's at high 60s.
Oh,
So,
really? Wow.
yeah, so it's really nice.
Yeah, we're in Oklahoma and it's in the 40s.
Oh wow. Yeah. Yeah.
When I look outside and see what you're looking at, it looks the very same thing here. All the trees and no leaves and just bare and barren,
Yep.
which
Yeah.
I'm excited to go out and really walk in the woods because this time of year you can do that.
Yeah.
And there's no brambles or no thorny stuff or
Yeah.
blackberry bushes or anything that can
Grab onto you.
grab onto you. Yeah.
Yeah. I also like it because I figure the snakes are dormant, so I don't have to worry so much.
Yeah. Well, that's true too. And the ticks and the chiggers and
Yeah,
you
all
know,
that stuff.
all
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah.
Yeah. How's Chris doing?
Good, good. He's working tonight, so yeah.
When's he going to finish up with that assignment?
I don't know. They don't know either. They initially said 6 months, and they said, oh, but maybe they would have to renew it for two more times, so it could be as much as 18 months. So I just don't even know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's amazing how horrendous that damage was. I
It
mean,
was.
have you been up there at all to see some of it?
I haven't. He's taken a few pictures, but yeah, he says it's really, really
It'll
bad.
take a long time to recover from that.
Yeah.
So, are you from North Carolina?
I was born in South Florida, but we moved here when I was like 10.
Oh, so you're like Paul.
Yeah.
He's
Did
basically South Carolinian.
Oh yeah, you moved there when he was little.
He moved to, I think he was 12 or 14.
Okay, yeah.
Well, you
Nice.
live in a nice part of the country, that's for sure.
Oh, it's beautiful. It's really beautiful.
I remember when we lived in Chicago, so many people said, you know, where I want to retire is right up to where you are.
Oh yeah. Well, it gets a lot colder in Chicago.
Yeah, well, that's why they wanted to retire where you are.
Yeah.
Yeah, a
Well,
lot
that's how I got
longer.
born in Florida. Is my grandpa was a school teacher in Chicago, and he said when he retired, he was going to move somewhere warm.
Yeah. Well, and now you know why Marion and I stay in South Texas.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
nice where you can come up here and just spend a week and it's beautiful. I mean, it's quiet. There's nothing.
Yeah.
Can't beat it.
And
The
then in
good
the
news is,
summertime, is it a bit of a break from the heat?
yeah. And the good news is Saturday we'll fly back to Texas.
Nice.
So everybody else looks like they're late coming on today.
It seems like somebody's connected. I bet that's
Yeah, I
Fred.
see that. That's Fred.
There you are.
Okay. Hey, John. Yeah,
How are
I'm here.
you?
Good.
We got a pretty small class today,
Right?
Do we? Well, we'll see.
but it's
Let's
a high quality class.
Right. We're going in for quality
Yeah,
this time.
Fred,
Okay.
Okay.
Fred, your A students showed up.
Good. Okay. We're down to the hardcore. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Let's give let's give Sue a couple of more minutes just to see if she
Yeah.
shows up.
Okay.
I like this section of the Torah that we're doing, Fred. Oops. Oh, Sue's here.
Or
Okay.
the Exodus,
There we
yes.
go.
Yeah. All your A
Yeah,
students
okay,
are
okay. Okay, well, okay, I think we have a quorum then. I think we can start.
here. Looks like
Okay.
it.
Yeah, the parsha, yeah, the parsha for this coming Shabbat is called Bishalach, and it just sort of carries along the story of the Exodus from Egypt. You know, the plagues are over now, and now we're picking up with them actually leaving Egypt. Um, we're let's see, chapter 13, and the very first section is verses 17 through 22. If someone wants to read that.
13, 17?
Yeah.
Okay.
13, yeah, 17 through
17 to
22.
22.
Okay. And it happened when Pharaoh sent the
Mm.
people off that God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, though it was close. For God thought, lest the people regret when they see battle and go back to Egypt. And God turned the people round by way of the wilderness of the Sea of Reeds. And the Israelites went up armed from the land of Egypt. And Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had solemnly made the sons of Israel swear, saying, God will surely single you out, and you shall take up my bones with you from here. And they journeyed from Sukkot and camped at Etham at the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord was going before them by day in a pillar of cloud to lead them on the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light to go by day and by night. The column of cloud would not budge by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. Should I keep going?
So there's a number of interesting things about that. One is the way of the Philistines. What he's talking about is that the most direct way, if you're leaving Egypt and you want to get to Canaan, the most direct way, they're in the Nile Delta, which is where Goshen is just to follow the Mediterranean coast. As it's by far the quickest way to go. Um, but that takes you through Gaza, you know, as you get into southern Israel. And and Gaza was where the Philistines were. The only problem is that whoever wrote this didn't realize there were no Philistines there then. This is about the 14th century, and there's fairly good archaeologic evidence that there were no Philistines in the Middle East till at least the 12th or maybe the 11th century. But obviously, this was written by somebody much later who didn't know exactly when the Philistines came to the Middle East and assumed they were there. There is another reason, though, why they might not have wanted to take the easy route along the Mediterranean coast, and that's that the Egyptians did have military installations all along that area. As sort of an early warning system of any attacks coming down, you know, from the north, and so they would run into Egyptian troops. You know, they went that way, so that they took a really roundabout way of doing that. The other thing is the translation you read said the Israelites went armed out of the land of Egypt. That it's a very obscure verse. The word that's being translated as armed is the Hebrew word chamushim, and it doesn't appear anywhere else in the Bible. So it's one of those words where you kind of have to guess what it means. Um, some translations say armed. However, there's several other commentators say that Chamushim must be related to Chamesh, which is five, you know, in Hebrew. And one theory, which actually Rashi had, is that the majority of people didn't leave Egypt. Only a fifth of them did. And this is what this word is kind of a theory. The other is that Hamushi may mean that they went in troops of five or troops of 50. It may refer to the size of units within the people. But again, it's one of those things where nobody really knows. Um,
And what you just said,
they went and they went in the wilderness. Yeah,
I
go
was
ahead.
just going to say what you just said, Fred, that they moved in smaller bands than one giant.
Well, that's one theory for that word
Yeah.
kamushim, if that's what it means. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, we don't know what the word means, so anything really is just a
Oh,
guess
okay, okay.
with this verse. The other thing it says is they went by the Sea of Reeds. Um, the Sea of what was probably the Sea of Reeds. Most people think in the area where the Suez Canal is now was a series of, excuse me, of, of shallow lakes called the Bitter Lakes. They had they were shallow lakes. They were full of reeds and they had very muddy bottoms. And you can imagine a very strong wind actually, blowing away enough water where you could walk across the lake. And with a really muddy bottom, heavy iron chariots would probably just bog down, and get stuck. And this is the actual
Yeah.
body of water that they would have crossed. You see, some translations will say the Red Sea, and you still see people talk about them crossing the Red Sea, which the text doesn't say. The text says Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds. And also, to get to the Red Sea from Goshen, you have to backtrack about 300 miles across Egypt just to get to the East Coast and the Red Sea. And if you cross the Red Sea from Egypt, you end up in Saudi Arabia, not in the Sinai Desert. Uh, Nobody is really quite sure how the Red Sea thing, got started because it's not in the text here. One interesting theory somebody came up with a few years ago is that south of Israel was the country of Edom. That was Esau's country. And Edom takes his name from the Hebrew Adom, red, because Esau was the red hairy twin. And we don't know the exact borders of Edom in those days. If it was large enough, it's possible that Edom may have stretched all the way down to the border of Egypt, in which case those lakes might have been called the Lakes of Edom, or or the Sea of Edom, which would be the Red Sea, Yam Edom, which is
Hmm.
kind of far-fetched, but it's probably as good an explanation for as any
That's any.
for how this whole Red Sea, thing got started in the first place.
So what you're saying, Fred, is that for all these years we've talked about the Red Sea, it really might not be the Red Sea that is named the Red Sea today.
Yeah. And the Bible doesn't ever mention the Red Sea. Every time it occurs in the Bible, it says Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds.
Uh-huh.
And the Red Sea thing must have started somehow. Um, I guess because it said sea, and then maybe they didn't consider the lakes a sea. Maybe the nearest sea, was the Red Sea, and they figured it had to be that. But the plain reading of a text is the Sea of Reeds.
Yeah. Oh, that is plain. That is clear, the Sea of Reeds.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay, because the
and
Red
it,
Sea, if you look at that, that's not a Sea of Reeds.
no, not at all. And it doesn't it doesn't go to the Sinai Desert. Crossing it
Yeah.
doesn't get you anywhere really.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh,
And then
I was just gonna share that I had a colleague at Florida State, and I was in the oceanography department. He's a physical oceanographer, and
mhm.
he wrote a paper about how there could be a wind event that I forget exactly where he said it was. I forget which of the seas he thought it could happen at, but a wind event that would be strong enough to move enough water that there would be dry land for them to walk across. And he had this whole statistical analysis about, how often these kinds of big winds come. And he was like, it's not impossible that in the last 10,000 years, something like that could have happened, and been recorded in history in some way. But anyway, he was not a religious person, but he was interested
Yeah.
in the
Well,
idea.
right. Yeah. Um, yeah, it's kind of interesting, with a shallow enough lake, you could imagine a strong wind pushing enough water around that you could wade across.
Yeah.
I don't buy the dry land thing though. I mean, it takes time, even
To
if you
dry
have
it out.
strong enough wind to sweep all the water out, you need hours or days for that muddy bottom to dry out. I mean, you can't have instant dry land. So,
Right,
Well,
right.
that one's a little hard to,
well,
but
that's one of the things.
then the narrative progresses. Oh, go ahead, John.
I was just going to say, this is one of those things that we have to leave to faith because you can't prove it or disprove it.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You know, given the way the Bitter Lakes are, something like that might be physically possible, but yeah, that's the only place they really could have crossed that way.
But and you look where they have these volcanic events underwater that cause the extreme changes in the bottom of the ocean where there's, you
Mhm.
know, and the tide or the water recedes way out beyond where it normally the high and low tides are, and people go out there and
Mhm.
they think they're going to be safe, and then all of a sudden
Mhm.
they're no mas.
Yeah, yeah, it's possible. Yeah. Then the narration goes on to chapter 14, and the next section is verse 1 through 9 of chapter 14. One want to read that?
Sure, I'll go ahead. Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the people of Israel to turn back and encamp in front of Phi Ha Rehoth
Mhm.
between Middal and the sea, in front of Baal Zephon. You shall encamp facing it by the sea, for Pharaoh will say of the people of Israel, they are wandering in the land, the wilderness has shut them in, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will pursue them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his host. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. And they did so. When the king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, the mind of Pharaoh and his servants was changed toward the people, and they said, what is this we have done, that we have let Israel go from serving us? So he made ready his chariot and took his army with him, and took 600 chosen chariots and all the other chariots of Egypt with officers over all of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the people of Israel while the people of Israel were going out defiantly. The Egyptians pursued them, all Pharaoh's horses and chariots and horsemen and his army, and overtook them, encamped at the sea by Phi Hiroth in front of Baal Zephon. When Pharaoh
Yeah.
drew near,
That's enough, John.
that's
You can
enough.
stop
Okay.
at that point. Yeah, yeah. That to me is really a strange section, though. What he appears to be doing is telling them, "Stop! Don't cross the sea now. Wait." He's kind of using the Israelites as bait to draw Pharaoh's army out so that it could be destroyed, really. And the amazing thing is that Pharaoh pursues them. You know, they've just killed all the firstborn in Egypt. You know, if you would have thought, that's enough. You know, who would want to have anything to do with the Israelites out of that
Sure.
after that? There are obviously thousands of Egyptians dead, and yet they're saying let's get them back again. But
Yeah.
yeah, I always have a hard time believing, this kind of thing.
Is
Um,
is this so God can show that he is the most powerful?
Exactly. That's what the whole thing is about. The Israelites are told to stop, wait so that the Egyptians can catch up with you. And so so they'll pursue you into the sea. Yeah, this is and Pharaoh's heart must be pretty hard. His own son has died, all the firstborn sons of Egypt have died, and he's coming back for more.
Yeah.
It's
Is
hard. It's kind of hard to believe it. Yeah.
Well, and also the description of getting all the chariots and all the horses and officers of Egypt to chase these poor Israelites.
Mhm.
You know?
In fact, well, you wonder how many people in his army were firstborn sons. How
Yeah,
much of his army had he lost already,
yeah.
during that 10th plague? But the Israelite response to it is kind of interesting. And that's the next group of verses is 10 through 14. So you want to read that?
Sure. As Pharaoh drew near, the Israelites caught sight of the Egyptians advancing upon them. Greatly frightened, the Israelites cried out to the Lord, and they said to Moses, "Was it for want of graves in Egypt that you brought us to die in this wilderness? What have you done to us, taking us out of Egypt? Is this not the very thing we told you in Egypt, saying, 'Let us be, and we will serve the Egyptians, for it is better for us'?" Turn the page. To serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. But Moses said to the people, "Have no fear, stand by and witness the deliverance which the Lord will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will battle for you, you hold your peace."
Yeah, this is kind of today is kind of amazing. These are the people that have seen all the signs and wonders in Egypt. They've seen all the 10 plagues strike the Egyptians, and still they don't really have any confidence in this. They said we should have stayed in Egypt. After all this, yeah, and this was the only generation of Jews, really, when you think about it, that didn't really have to have any faith. I mean, they'd seen all this with their own eyes. They didn't have. It's not a question of saying, we want you to believe that God can do this. They had seen it. I mean, there's no faith required. Yet here they are. We should have stayed in Egypt. It was all a mistake. Yeah. And most of the book of Exodus to me, just raises the question, why were these people chosen?
Well, but it shows too, human nature is we always uh,
Yeah.
gravitate towards the status quo. And it's about risk taking.
Hmm. Yeah, it is. And these people, I mean, just nothing, it's just the Exodus is really a long story of whining, complaining, rebelling.
Yeah.
Uh yeah, yeah. The next, then you get into the destruction of Pharaoh's army, which is verses 15 through 31.
Okay.
Hey, since we have a small group here, I'll do some of the reading. It's fair to stick you guys with everything. So the next section is 15 to 31, and that starts with the Lord said to Moses, "Why do you cry out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward, and you lift up your rod and hold your arm over the sea and split it, so that the Israelites may march into the sea on dry land. And I will stiffen the hearts of the Egyptians so that they go in after them. And I will assert my authority against Pharaoh and all his warriors and his horsemen. Let the Egyptians know that I am the Lord when I assert my authority against Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen," which really kind of gives the whole thing away. This is just
Mhm.
God, impressing on the Egyptians that he's the Alpha God in the Middle East. And that's what this whole show is set up for. The angel of God who had been going ahead of the Israelite army now moved and followed behind them. And the pillar of cloud shifted from in front of them and took up a place behind them. And it came between the army of the Egyptians and the army of Israel. Thus there was cloud with the darkness, and it cast a spell upon the night, so that one could not come near the other all through the night. Then Moses held out his arm over the sea, and the Lord drove back the sea with a strong east wind all night and turned the sea into dry ground. The waters were split. So basically, this is a windstorm that goes on for hours, all through the night. Because you think that any hurricane or whatever this was that is strong enough, to wash away all the water in the lake, what would it have done to the people? Yeah, how can anybody stand up, with that force wind going on
Yeah,
um,
especially in the desert with the
in the
sand.
desert? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Unless the wind was only blowing into the lake, it was just focused on that, and it
Yeah.
wasn't blowing anywhere else. And the Israelites went into the sea on dry ground, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. If you saw the movie, you know that they actually tried to recreate that. They tried to stay as close to the literal text as they could. And you see there's actually kind of a wall there on either side of, and these swirls of water behind it. Of course, the problem is it looked kind of tacky because they didn't have those computer graphics back then when they made the movie. So it looks like they put a sheet of glass on either side and then just swirled some water around behind it, you know, to try to get the effect. Um, the Egyptians came in pursuit after them into the sea, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and horsemen. And at the morning watch, and what they mean by that in the Bible, the night was divided into three watches. There was 8 p.m. to midnight, midnight to 4 a.m., 4 a.m. to 8. So you assume if it's the morning watch, this is probably the one that starts at 4 a.m. This is probably maybe just before dawn or sometime between 4 and 8. The Lord looked down upon the Egyptian army from a pillar of fire and cloud and threw the Egyptian army into panic. He locked the wheels of their chariots so that they moved forward with difficulty. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from the Israelites, for the Lord is fighting for them against Egypt. Then, let's see. Then the Lord said to Moses, hold out your arm over the sea, that the waters may come back upon the Egyptians and upon their chariots and horsemen. And Moses held out his arm over the sea, and at daybreak, the sea returned to its normal state. So if the sea returned at daybreak, you figured if it was the first watch, the morning watch, this whole thing probably started at 4 a.m. And now it probably would have taken a couple of hours at least, you know, for the Israelites to cross. And so now this is probably close to the 8 a.m. end of the morning watch. And the Egyptians fled its approach, but the Lord hurled the Egyptians into the sea. The waters turned back and covered the chariots and horsemen. Pharaoh's entire army that had followed after them into the sea, not one of them remained. But the Israelites marched through the sea on dry land, the waters forming a wall for them on their right and on their left. Thus the Lord delivered Israel that day from the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead upon the shore of the sea. And when Israel saw the wondrous power which the Lord had wielded against the Egyptians, the people feared the Lord. They had faith in the Lord and in his servant Moses. Um, there's a famous midrash that was made up about this. According to the midrash, when Moses first held his rod over the sea, nothing happened. The sea didn't split. Everybody's waiting and he's holding his rod out, but the sea is not splitting. And it didn't split until one Israelite had enough faith to jump into the sea. And as soon as he hit the water split. Um, and the guy's name was let's see, Nachshon ben Aminadab. He's from the tribe of Judah. He actually turns out to be, I think, the great grandfather of Boaz, you know, who marries Ruth. So he's one of the ancestors of King David. And the idea was that God was not going to do the miracle until at least one Israelite had enough faith to jump into the sea, you know, and that's how the miracle happened. And it's interesting, in 1948, during Israel's War of Independence, one of the military campaigns was to try to open a road to Jerusalem. The Jordanian Arab Legion had surrounded the area around Jerusalem, and the Jews there really were under siege and running out of food and water. And so there was an operation to try to open up a road to Jerusalem. And they named it Operation Nachshon after the midrash. It's something that every Israeli school kid learns about, you know, growing up, and that they actually call the military operation Operation Nachshon. So and the next section, actually, the narrative kind of breaks off at this point, because the next section is what's called the Song of the Sea, which if you have a copy of the Bible with the Hebrew text, you'll notice that it isn't arranged in straight lines. It's arranged really in little sections that are laid out, which is the way poetry is laid out, you know, in the Bible. This is really the first major piece of poetry in the Bible. It's really been all narrative, up until this point. And we'll be reading that this Saturday morning at services. And it's actually customary when this is read, the congregation rises and it stands through the reading of this song.
Why is
And
that?
that, what?
Why is that?
It's just an old tradition, and nobody
Okay.
knows exactly why. It's all, well, one of the things that the Haggadah tells you at the Passover Seder is that every Israelite is supposed to feel as if he had personally been
Right.
rescued from Egypt.
Right.
That you had actually somehow participated in this whole thing. And so, in a sense, everybody is rising to sing this song of triumph, that we've been rescued from Egypt and the Egyptian army has been destroyed. Um, it goes from it's really chapter 15, and it goes from verse see well actually it goes from verse 1 through verse 19 in chapter 15. So somebody want to take that one on?
Sure. Then did Moses sing, and all the Israelites with him, this song to the Lord, and they said, saying, Let me sing unto the Lord, for he surged. O surged, horse and its rider he hurled into the sea. My strength and my power is Yah, and he became my deliverance. This is my God, I extol him, God of my fathers, I exalt him. The Lord is a man of war, the Lord is his name. Pharaoh's chariots and his force he pitched into the sea, and the pick of his captains were drowned in the reed sea. The depth did cover them over, down they went in the deep like a stone. Your right hand, O Lord, is mighty in power. Your right hand, O Lord, smashes the enemy. In your great surging you wreck those against you. You send forth your wrath, it consumes them like straw. And with the breath of your nostrils, waters heaped up. Streams stood up like a mound, the depths congealed in the heart of the sea. The enemy said, I'll pursue, overtake, divide up the loot. My gullet will fill with them. I'll bear my sword, my hand despoil them. You blew with your breath, the sea covered them over. They sank like lead in the mighty waters. Who is like you among the gods, O Lord? Who is like you, mighty in holiness? Awesome in praise, worker of wonders. You stretched out your hand, earth swallowed them up. You led forth in your kindness this people that you redeemed. You guided them in your strength to your holy abode. Peoples heard, they quaked. Trembling seized Philistines' dwellers. Then were the chieftains of Edom dismayed. The dukes of Moab, shuddering, seized them. All the dwellers of Canaan quailed. Terror and fear did fall upon them. As your arm loomed big, they were like a stone. Till your people crossed over, O Lord, till the people you made, yours crossed over. You'll bring them, you'll plant them on the mount of your estate, a firm place for your dwelling you wrought, O Lord, the sanctum, O sovereign, your hands firmly founded. The Lord shall be king for all time. For Pharaoh had come with his chariots and his riders into the sea, and the Lord turned the waters of the sea back upon them. But the Israelites went on dry land in the midst of the sea. And Miriam the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took the timbrel in her hand, and all the women went out after her with timbrels and dances. And Miriam sung out to them, Sing to the Lord, for he has surged. O surged, horse and its rider he hurled into the sea. And Moses made the Israelite... Oh, sorry.
You can stop there. That's the whole song. That's the point where we sit down again.
Okay.
There's several things
Sure.
about this. Some of these verses have been taken and put into the regular synagogue liturgy. Like this is where we get the Michomocha, who is like you, O Lord, among the gods, who is like you, majestic in holiness, awesome in splendor, working wonders. That's Michomocha, Boelim Adonai. It's the one we sing before we do the Amidah, at service, and so that's taken from there. And then it's interesting. This is the first time Miriam has been identified as a prophetess, and also it's interesting that she dances. Apparently in the Bible, dancing was a common means of celebration, and not just for the women. Later on, you read about David dancing when they bring the ark back to Jerusalem, and there are several other instances. And apparently by the Greco-Roman period, it had just gone out of style. People weren't doing it anymore. And the group that actually brought it back are the Hasidim. If you've ever been to a Hasidic get-together, there's always dancing. I mean, it's not our kind of dancing. The men dance with men and the women dance with women, but still, they've really revived it, and they tell you that the dancing was a biblical way of celebrating, and it got lost along the way somewhere, and they feel that they're really reviving it, making it part of Jewish celebration again. And then the rest of the parsha picks up with what happens after the sea. And the next section is chapter 15, 22 through 27. Someone
Fred,
wants to read that. Yeah,
before we start reading that, as we've gone through this, is this God proving not only through what happens to the Egyptians, but to the Israelites, uh, reinforcing that he is their God?
yeah, exactly. Like I said at the end, and the people saw this and they had faith in God.
Yes.
Um, but in spite of that, though, as we read into this, they're gonna doubt this over and over and over again. It's given the show God put on in Egypt, you figure that would convince anybody, but apparently it didn't. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
it really didn't. Um, so, and you'll see that now what we're going to begin reading. I mean, this is it kind of goes downhill after they cross the sea. You think Moses just had his hands full, with one thing after another. So if somebody wants to read 22 through 27 in
Sure,
chapter
I'll
15.
do it. Then Moses made Israel set out from the Red Sea, and they went out into the wilderness of Shur. They went 3 days in the wilderness and found no water. When they came to Marah, they could not drink the water of Marah because it was bitter. Therefore, it was named Marah. And the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What shall we drink?" And he cried to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a log, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There the Lord made for them a statute and a rule, and there he tested them, saying, if you diligently listen to the voice of the Lord your God, and do that which is right in his eyes, and give ear to his commandments, and keep all his statutes, I will put none of the diseases on you that I put on Egypt, on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord your healer. Then
So
they
yeah,
okay,
well, there's one more verse with
okay.
that. Yeah.
Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs of water and 70 palm trees, and they encamped there by the water.
And so again, right away after all these miracles and this great song of the sea, the very next verse, the whining starts again. We're thirsty, and people have actually tried to find some kind of mechanism for what Moses did with the water. You know, 'cause, in fact, there's a theory that oak bark contains tannins, which might react with albuminous substances in the water and maybe remove what was making it bitter. There might actually be some kind of natural explanation, for what happened there. Um, when he's talking about the diseases that I brought upon the Egyptians, it's not clear because the description of the 10 plagues doesn't discuss diseases. Well, there's one, the boils. There's the boils that came on. That could be one of the diseases. And the death of the firstborn, that might have been some kind of a plague that he brought on them. So the assumption is he might be referring back to that. But this really kind of sets the pattern for the rest of the book of Exodus, just continuously complaining about one thing or another. Um, the next section after they, they get the water. We go to chapter 16, and that's the first 12 verses. That's when they first get the manna. Um, does anybody want to read 1 through 12, the first 12 verses on 16?
I would,
Setting,
I would try, but I'm having computer issues. So
oh, okay. Setting out from Elim, the whole Israelite community came to the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after their departure from the land of Egypt. In the wilderness, the whole Israelite community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. And the Israelites said to them, if only we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the flesh pots, when we ate our fill of bread. For you have brought us out here into this wilderness to starve this whole congregation to death. And the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread for you from the sky, and the people shall go out and gather it each day that day's portion, and that I may thus test them to see whether they will follow my instructions or not. But on the sixth day, when the apportion what they had brought in should prove to double the amount they gathered each day. So Moses said to the Israelites, by evening you shall know it was the Lord who brought you out from the land of Egypt. And in the morning you shall behold the presence of the Lord, because he has heard your grumblings against the Lord. For who are we that you should grumble against us, since it is the Lord, Moses continued, who will give you flesh to eat in the evening and bread in the morning to the fill, because the Lord has heard your grumblings you utter against him. What is your part? Your grumblings is not against us, but against the Lord. Do you want me to keep reading?
Yeah, through 12.
Yeah. Then Moses said to Aaron, say to the whole Israelite community, advance toward the Lord, for he has heard your grumbling. And as Aaron spoke to the whole Israelite community, they turned toward the wilderness, and there in the cloud appeared the presence of the Lord. The Lord spoke to Moses, I have heard the grumbling of the Israelites. Speak to them and say, by evening you shall eat flesh, and in the morning you shall have your fill of bread, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God. In the evening, quail appeared and covered the camp. In the morning, there was a fall of dew about the camp. When the fall of dew lifted, there on the surface of the wilderness lay a fine, flaky substance, as fine as frost on the ground. When Israelites saw it, they said to one another, what is this? For they did not know what it was. And Moses said to them, that is the bread that the Lord has given you to eat. That is what the Lord has commanded. Gather up as much of it as each of you requires to eat, and omer a portion for as many of you as there are. Each of you shall fetch for those in his tent.
And so here again, the complaining goes on. This time it's about food. And so God sends them the manna. Nobody knows where manna really got its name from. One is that the Hebrew word ma means what? And they're basically saying, what is this? And so the manna may actually come from the Hebrew ma, it's meaning what is it? Okay. And of course, the idea is that he's testing them, and they're going to get a portion every day, but on the sixth day they're going to get a double portion, so that they won't have to go out on the seventh day of the Sabbath, to gather the stuff in. Which, I think of it as a little bit weird, because nobody said anything about there being a Sabbath yet. The Torah hasn't been given yet, and there's no previous mention anywhere in the Bible, prior to this about a Sabbath. But apparently this is the first mention in the Bible that there's something special about the seventh day, and that you can't gather your food on the seventh day. And then they continue with the manna, going on really through verse 35. I'll go ahead and read some of that. See, starting with verse 17. The Israelites, going back to 16, this is what the Lord has commanded. Gather as much of it as each of you requires to eat, an omer to a person. For as many of you as there are, each of you shall fetch for those in his tent. And of course, the omer is a measure, sort of like a bushel. It's a volume measure. The belief is that it's something like about 3 quarts. So you'd have a basket where you get 3 quarts of this manna into. The Israelites did so, gathering much, some gathering much, some little. When they measured it by the omer, he who had gathered much had no excess. He who had gathered little had no deficiency. They had gathered as much as they needed to eat. And Moses said to them, let no one leave any of it over till the morning. In other words, you're showing your faith that there'll be some the next morning. You don't have to hoard it and worry about God not giving it the next day. But they paid no attention to Moses. Some of them left it till morning, and it became infested with maggots and stank, and Moses was angry with them. So they gathered it every morning, each as much as he needed to eat. But when the sun grew hot, it would melt. And on the 6th day, they gathered double the amount of food, 2 omers for each. And the chief of the assembly came and told Moses. He said to them, this is what the Lord meant. Tomorrow was a day of rest, a holy Sabbath of the Lord. And so basically, this is the first time Moses has mentioned such a thing as a Sabbath to them. Although, again, if you go back to the creation story, it says God rested on the 7th day. But this is really the first time the people are told that the 7th day is a special day, that's the Sabbath to the Lord. Bake what you would bake, and boil what you would boil, and all that is left put aside to be kept until morning. And so they put it aside till morning, as Moses had ordered, but it did not turn foul. There were no maggots in it. And Moses said, eat it today, for tomorrow is the Sabbath of the Lord. You will not find it today on the plain. 6 days you shall gather it. On the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will be none. Yet some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather, but they found nothing. And the Lord said to Moses, how long will you men refuse to obey my commandments and my teachings? Mark that the Lord has given you the Sabbath. Therefore, he gives you 2 days' food on the 6th day. Let everyone remain where he is. Let no man leave his place on the 7th day. So the people remained inactive on the 7th day. The house of Israel named it manna. It was like coriander seed, white, and it tasted like wafers and honey. Moses said, this is what the Lord has commanded. Let 1 omer of it be kept throughout the ages, in order that they see the bread that I fed you in the wilderness when I brought you out from the land of Egypt. And Moses said to Aaron, take a jar, put 1 omer of manna in it, and place it before the Lord to be kept throughout the ages. As the Lord had commanded Moses, Aaron placed it before the testimony to be kept. And the Israelites ate manna for 40 years until they came to a settled land. They ate the manna until they came to the border of the land of Canaan. And the omer is 1/10 of an ephah. This is kind of interesting because that jar with the manna is never mentioned again. We really don't know what happened to it. Later on, when Exodus describes building the sanctuary, and they describe all the stuff that goes in the sanctuary, the incense altars and the table with the showbread and the Ark of the Testimony and whatnot, but nobody mentions that jar of manna. So we just don't know. It's never mentioned again in the Bible. That's sort of where it ends.
What's also interesting, in the first part it talked about if you take too much and you hold it overnight, it all went sour and got full of maggots.
Mm-hmm.
And then they're saying, well, there's
except on Friday night. In other words, you can't, your regular daily portion of it, you have to eat that day. If you try to save it for the next day, it'll go bad overnight.
Yes.
But the 6th day is a special day. The extra portion that you have on the 6th day, that you can leave overnight and it won't go bad. It will stay good. And that's what you're going to eat on the Sabbath. It's kind of a test of faith. And
Mhm.
so far, God's given them several tests of faith, and they flunked every one of them so far.
Yeah.
Basically, um,
Slow learners.
yeah, exactly. Um, and then the very last portion of the parsha, we're in chapter 17 now, and it goes. in 17 verses 1 through 16. Um, Somebody want to read that portion? That sort of ends the parsha.
I can read it. And all the community of Israelites journeyed onward from the wilderness of Sin on their journeys by the Lord's direction. And they encamped at Rephidim, and there was no water for the people to drink. And the people disputed with Moses, and they said, "Give us water that we may drink." And Moses said to them, "Why do you dispute with me, and why do you test the Lord?" And the people thirsted for water there, and the people murmured against Moses and said, "Why is it you brought us up from Egypt to bring death on me and my children and my livestock by thirst?" And Moses called out to the Lord, saying, "What shall I do with this people? Yet a little more, and they will stone me." And the Lord said to Moses, "Pass before the people, and take with you some of Israel's elders, and the staff with which you struck the Nile, take that in your hand, and go. Look, I am about to stand before you there on the rock in Horeb, and you shall strike the rock, and water will come out from it, and the people will drink." And thus did Moses do before the eyes of Israel's elders. And he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, testing and dispute, for the disputation of the Israelites, and for their testing the Lord, saying, "Is the Lord in our midst or not?" And Amalek came and did battle with Israel at Rephidim, and Moses said to Joshua, "Choose men for us, and go out, battle against Amalek tomorrow. I shall take my station on the hilltop with the staff of God in my hand." And Joshua did as Moses had said to him to battle against Amalek and Moses. Aaron and Hur had gone up to the hilltop. And so when Moses would raise his hand, Israel prevailed. And when he would put down his hand, Amalek prevailed. And Moses' hands grew heavy, and they took a stone and put it beneath him, and he sat upon it. And Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on each side. And it happened that his hands were steady till the sun came down, and Joshua disabled Amalek and his people by the edge of the sword. And the Lord said to Moses, "Write this down
Yeah,
as
go
a
ahead.
remembrance in a record, and put it in Joshua's hearing, that I will surely wipe out the name of Amalek from under the heavens." And Moses built an altar, and he called its name, "The Lord is my banner." And he said, "For hand upon Yah's throne, war for the Lord against Amalek from all time."
Um, the first part, of course, is here. The first 7 verses is just the people whining again about water, and you're trying to kill us. We should have stayed in Egypt. But then with they start with Amalek, and the Amalekites were apparently a band of nomads in the Sinai desert, who were attacking the Israelites repeatedly as they went through Sinai. Um, and Amalek really, it's the other interesting thing about this is the first time Joshua is mentioned in the Bible. We're not told anything about him before. He kind of just pops up out of nowhere. In the movie, he had a part before they left Egypt, but in the book here, this is the first time we learn about Joshua. Um, and basically, Amalek sort of became a proverbial name. The enemies of Israel were always called Amalek. And later on, in the Greco-Roman period, Amalek was the name given to the Romans. Later on, the Middle Ages, it was the name given to the Inquisition. In the modern era, Amalek was the name given to Nazi Germany. The enemies of Israel are always designated as Amalek. And in the Purim story, um, in the book of Samuel, one of the battles that Saul fights with the Amalekites, there's Agag, who was the king of the Amalekites at the time. And in the book of Esther, Haman is the Agagite. Haman is a descendant so Haman is an Amalekite. So that's just one more example of Amalek and Israel going at it. It just repeats itself through the ages. There are two nations that are sort of have legendary status as kind of symbolizing the enemies of Israel. One is Amalek, and the other is Edom. They appear over and over again in history as the bad guys here. But the thing that always struck me is that these people, all these tests of faith, they really are failing every single one. they, for all the miracles that they've seen with their own eyes, they really have no faith.
No, what do
You know,
you?
every time we're hungry, we're thirsty. Are we there yet? We were better off in Egypt. Maybe we should have stayed there. It's not a very promising beginning.
Well, and Moses keeps performing all of these miracles that save him. You think that they
Mm.
would say, hey, God is working for us.
Yeah, this is pretty
He does
impressive.
have a
Yeah,
mission
exactly.
for us.
Yeah, yeah. But it's amazing. Well, there is one midrash about the giving of the Torah. That God gave the Torah to Israel after he tried to give it to everybody else. Israel was Israel was his last choice. Nobody really wanted it. There were too many rules, too many laws. The thing was just too much of a burden. And
Yeah.
finally, when everybody else had refused it, he finally dumped it on the Israelites.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. If you read the prophets, Isaiah or Jeremiah, they're actually go back to this and say, your fathers were sinning from the very first. Since the day they left Egypt, they were sinning. And the later rabbis really said, that really is a measure of how merciful and patient God is. The sinning started from the exodus from Egypt, went on generation after generation after generation. And it wasn't until, dozens of generations of this later that God finally said enough is enough. And the Babylonians destroyed, Jerusalem and the temple and took them into exile. But when you figure this was like 20 or maybe 30 generations of sin, God was being pretty patient with them.
Yeah. Well, and this also, when we read through this, this has been repeated over and over again all the way through today.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
God is patient with us.
He really is, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody have any other questions or comments? Well, okay. The portion next week is Jethro, basically, and that's another one of the really important portions because this portion is going to describe the Mount Sinai and the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai. So it's another one of the really important portions in the cycle. Okay. And that's going to start with chapter 18.
Right.
Sounds
So,
good. Thanks, Fred.
All right,
Thanks,
thanks.
Fred.
see you guys next
See
week.
you all next week.
See you.
Bye, everybody.
See you
Bye.
soon.